So just shortly who we are, we say that we're Sweden's biggest and smallest social impact investor. Biggest because we have the biggest reach out. We've done, as you see, about 180 social finance cases. But we're also smallest because we work with microfinance. It's small credits and credit guarantees to social enterprises. So there might be a few social impact investors in Sweden who have done as much when in terms of Swedish crowns or euros, but not in reaching as many enterprises. So yes, here you see some examples from our portfolio. It can be rural community centers. It can be up in the middle, you see like non-profit school run by like what's it, voluntary organization in socioeconomic difficult area in Sweden, targeting vulnerable groups, helping them increase their or improve their grades so they can continue to university. You see to the upper right an example of a workers cooperative working with sustainable transports, yeah, etc., etc. I won't go through them all. But you also see that it's an important criteria for us that they all have red wooden houses. No, just happen to be that way in Sweden. Yeah, so our target group are social enterprises, associations, cooperatives, social economy. Based in Sweden, they have to contribute in a positive way to the Sustainable Development Goals, and they have to have the ability to repay. So we're not working with grants. And when we've gone through these about 180 cases, we can see that there are 3 focus areas. This is not like we're not excluding based on this. It's just it's reflecting a trend in Sweden's social economy. So we have a lot of examples of work integration, also social cooperative housing, and a lot in local development, rural development, or development in suburbs can be as well. Yes, so measuring impact. This is in Swedish. We are members of a network in Sweden called Impactful, and I think I like this illustration. It's the impact stairs. You know, you start by making your theory of change, then you start measuring your output, and then you start measuring your outcome. Then you might begin to actually measure your impact, and then you scale and repeat. And I would say we are now, this session is a lot about that we're trying to go from measuring output to outcome. I would say this 4th step, that would demand something like research team or a university deciding to work with reference groups and things that we don't have resources to do. But this is about trying to go from measuring output to outcome. This is a very simplified version of our theory of change. On the right-hand side, you see our focus problem is that social enterprises do not qualify for investment and cannot grow. And we say that the root problem, you could shortly define it as it's blocked here, but I think it says like financial exclusion, and that can be, of different causes, but yeah, we can call it that to be quick now. And the consequences are that social enterprises cannot create as much social impact as they would have if they could invest. So on the solution side, the left-hand side, our short-term target is financial inclusion of social enterprises, that we lend them money or make guarantees so they can get bank loans. And then the social enterprises can invest. And then the long-term goal is, of course, that the social enterprises will create more social impact. And this is what we try to measure now to see that this is really what's happening. And I don't know, Barbara, this is what you made. Maybe you will go through this.
No, please
more.
Go ahead. That's perfect. No,
Yeah,
perfect. I can do so, but please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so we looked at these three focus areas: the work integration, social enterprises, the housing co-ops, and the local development. Parts of our portfolio, and we thought that we need maybe different KPIs to really capture the output and outcome from these different social areas, you could say. So yeah, this spring, we did a questionnaire to all our portfolio social enterprises where we asked them about these things, like the number of employees from the target group, the number of trainees, and the funding volume in total for the work integration social enterprises. And we also asked them about, you will see later, about the share of female leaders, and also a bit about our additionality, but I will present that soon. When it came to the housing co-ops, we asked about the number of residents, the number of housing projects or units, also the funding volume. And then when it comes to local development, also the number of beneficiaries, or customers or users, and the number of life-improving efforts. And then we made a list of different kinds of life-improving efforts, and they could tick the ones they're working with or define by themselves what kind of life-improving efforts they are doing. Yeah, and then we also created this metrics to collect the outcome data. So for example, when it came to the whys, we said that maybe we should look at the increased income of the employees, how long time it took for the trainees to find employment later on. And also we wanted to look at empowerment, because we think that this is like, we say, the red thread when it comes to working with social enterprises. It's about empowering vulnerable groups. Yes, and then, for example, when it came to the whys, we said we could look at if they actually became co-owners or members of the social cooperative where they were working, and if they were taking part in decision making, or becoming active in civil society somehow. When it came to housing, we said we could ask about if they got access to the appropriate forms of housing, if they had decrease in loneliness, because that's a social problem that the Swedish government is putting a lot of focus on, that Swedes are very lonely. I think we are the Europeans who have most single households, and we have a lot of problems with depression and so on. So this was an important KPI to us. Also, looking at self-empowerment, like higher sense of self-esteem. And then when it came to local development, we could also look at job creation and increased access to local community services, like pharmacy, grocery, cultural events, etc. Yes, and when it came to empowerment, it could be questions about activation of local community members. We're not really there yet, and I will come to the questions. But I can show you quickly the results we got from the output questionnaire. And this is just a slide from we call it impact report. We are, daring and call it impact report, even though we don't think it sounds as trendy to say that it's an output report. But yes, where we try to illustrate the different numbers we got. Here's, for example, that 59% of the social enterprises had women as share president of the organization, and that we could see that we reached 38,726 people with life improving activities in different ways. And so on. When it came to the WISE, the Work Integration Social Enterprises, we could see that I think it was 180 severely disadvantaged workers, long-term unemployed people who got employment in these WISE. And we could see that about 280 people did internship training in these WISE during 2024. So we have one of our investors is Ferd, which is a Norwegian philanthropic impact fund. And their impact measurement, they are trying to split the social impact into life-changing activities and life-improving activities. And we try to report this to them. They are especially interested in work integration. So we define getting employed as life-changing and trained to improved because it improves your employability, your chance that you get employed. Yeah, and this is just one example from our portfolio, the Way Out cooperative social franchise run by and employs women leaving prison, and now also migrants and people with mental issues. And they have cafes, hotels, shops, rehab, etc. Yes, and they are very ambitious when it comes to impact measurement. They had researchers, investigating them in different ways. For example, we had a macroeconomist who did a calculation saying that they save 5.5 million euros per year for the public sector with their 111 employees. So that's a bit of their work on that. When it came to housing, we could see that a bit more than 60 people got access to affordable housing through our portfolio, and that they created, I think, maybe 18 new housing entities, like houses or apartments. And this is one example. Oh, the layout wasn't very good. This is the Own Home Factory cooperative in the Tjörn Island in the Gothenburg archipelago, where young and newly immigrated people can build their first cheap own house with help from professional architects and carpenters. And we gave them a micro loan when they started in 2019. And after their first year, they won the Best Cooperative in Sweden of the Year prize. And they managed to build 18 small homes, tiny houses like that in this rural area. And they employed 30 people, where half of them were young women and half were refugees. So yeah, they do quite an impressive work. So we're trying to work with this kind of storytelling as well, like impact stories. Yes, and so the local development portfolio was maybe the most difficult because it's very diverse activities they have. And we could see that, let's see, one of the bigger shares here is local cooperative grocery stores in sparsely populated areas where they didn't have access to a grocery store or a service place before. And then the second biggest is like non-profit welfare. So this is mainly parent cooperative children's daycare. It can be also, like I mentioned, non-profit schools, etc. So yeah. And then we have a lot of culture associations. It can be environmentally friendly transports, sustainable farming, or food production, and also a lot of these rural community houses where the community can have meetings and parties, etc., and it's co-owned as a common by the village. So most of our portfolio is related to this, and of course, it's this is difficult to calculate, but like, for example, the grocery store, they would then estimate like how big percentage of all the inhabitants in this village is actually shopping here, for example. And when it comes to the welfare, they would say, for example, how many children are in their school, like that. Culture was also a bit difficult. I think most of the people came from culture because, for example, we had a theater group doing what do you say, shows? That's not the word for a theater. They are doing theater where they try to represent underrepresented groups, and they go out to schools and show their play to the pupils. So in each year they maybe do their play for I don't know, 10,000 people. So they had a big share of this. And like, yeah, how life improving is that? But yeah, of course, I think it's positive for children to maybe like for the first time see their minority group represented in culture, etc. So yeah, why not? This is one example. Utveckla Örbybo-Vendel is a village action group who run a EU leader project where they educated 50 climate transition ambassadors, and they did the local economic development plans in 3 villages. And yeah, you know, with EU projects, the money often comes afterwards, so they get into liquidity problems if they can't have a bridge loan. So that's what we did. And yeah, when we've been like analyzing our portfolio for some years, we can see that about 60% of our financing has gone to female applicants. And if we compare it to the state-owned microfinance program for-profit companies, they only invest 28% in women and mixed teams. So women are actually underrepresented compared to the national average female entrepreneurs. So we're quite proud of that. Yeah, and then we also tried, this is another of your slides, Barbara, that I'm stealing here, but we really like it, about financial additionality of the investors. Like, how can we claim that we in any way had part in this output? So this is just that we like try to analyze ourselves in relation to this metrics. But so we also asked all our investees, how important has Mikrofonden's financing been to your organization's ability to create this impact? And then the average was 4.6 of 5. A lot of them said 5, and I don't think it's just to flatter us, because you know we did startup financing. They couldn't have started their association without our support. And some of them, like, I think these are 2 quite big organizations who they already have access to banking services and so on. They just like used us for a short bridge funding that they might have been able to receive from some other finance institution. So yeah. Okay, so just a bit like how this has been useful for us. I think it will be very useful in fundraising. We can already see when we do pitching to potential investors that they get, impressed and kind of confident about our ability when they see that we actually, know what we're doing and we do follow up and so on. It's also important because it's requested by our current investors, like FER that I mentioned. Also, this is Impulse and EIF. And it's been very useful for public communication, for like posting on our social media, etc., to get visibility. It's also in line with the new Swedish standard for social impact measurement, which we think that investors and authorities in Sweden will use more and more when they do, for example, grant calls. So we're already prepared for that. And we also got some positive attention from the public and social economy sector when we were showing our impact report in social media. This was shared by other networks and so on as a good example of how we can work. Okay, so we asked for this to have this session today because we have some questions about next step when it comes to measuring outcome. So we have already, as I showed you, identified relevant questions for data collection that would be done by our investees, probably not by us, reaching out to their customers or members. But we see that they and we lack resources to conduct such interviews with almost, you saw, it was almost 39,000 persons who were, somehow affected. And yeah, so this is just not feasible. So one of the questions is can we work with samples instead of 100% coverage? And what is good enough? That's our main question for today. Where do we put our ambition in the right level? It has to be feasible, but still, there's no point in doing it too small or too little, so it doesn't actually, show anything. Yeah. Okay. Feel free to join me on or add me on LinkedIn, and please like our social media if you want to follow. It's mainly in Swedish, but I think a lot of platforms are good at doing automatic translation to your language. So, okay, that's my
Thank you very much.
presentation.
I think that was an amazing overview. Are there any questions as of now to Ylva or Ingrid, also for Mikrofonden, on the organization and their journey so far? Okay. Rafael, you have a question? You're muted right now. I don't know if you'd like to ask something.
Sorry, I was muted, yes. That is for Ylva. I would like you to specify a little bit better exactly how is the money flows and what is exactly the role of Mikrofonden regarding these money flows between where is the money coming from to reach really the investees. Because you mentioned guarantees, but in fact, it's relevant for us to see the money flows, who puts really the money, and what is your role really in organizing the agreement, the financial agreement, I mean. Thank you.
Yes, so we are working with both guarantees and credits, so it's a bit different with these two. One thing that we have been measuring now, which we think is interesting, is that we can see that our capital is catalytic. Usually we stand for just 25% of the total investment, but we are the ones who are opening the doors to the banks or to the grant provider, etc. We are the ones saying that, okay, if you give this association this grant, we will provide them with a liquidity loan, and then the leader office says, okay, this association will get their grant. Or for example, we have this, what's it called? Homeless shelter, where they, all the banks said no because they are a non-profit association. So we introduced them to one of the cooperative banks, Ekobanken, that we collaborate with closely. So that cooperative bank said, okay, if you want to buy this house for a shelter for homeless, we can give a loan for just 60% of the market value of the house. So we said, okay, we will cover up for 20% more, and then they had 20% to pay. And then we also gave them a small microloan just to renovate the house to make it that the authorities would accept that it would be used in such a manner. So yeah, I don't have any slides to show you like the finance flow or the amounts or anything, but this was just shortly on that topic.
And in the case of guarantee schemes, where you are really you would be or might be forced to cover up losses, do you have any failure rate that you can share with us?
Yes, it was like one of all the numbers on the from our impact report. We have on portfolio level, our annual average is 0.6% credit loss, and on fund level it's 0.3. So it's extremely low. It's really nothing. I think, I mean, in total of these 180 social enterprises, I think it's actually just 3 who went bankrupt. And sometimes it was also like in the end of the repayment period, so we didn't lose like all the money.
Then a provocative question. Is that so low failure rate is because you don't take heavy risks? You are very conservative in taking risks? I take this question because this same question was placed by representative of the EIB group in our country, saying exactly that the role of a guarantee is to make financial intermediaries be able to take more risk, Otherwise, the guarantee doesn't play its full role, And
I would say
he had severe arguments with the banks in our country, saying exactly, you want guarantees, but in fact, you don't use them. So what's the purpose? Or for us, EIB group, signing up guarantees that are idle on the shelves because in fact they are not passed over to the market. Thank you.
Yes. So I would say that the main point, we are also signing a EIF guarantee now, and the main purpose for us is validation in relation to investors to make our fundraising easier, because it's been very difficult for us to fundraise. If we cannot access more funds soon, we will have to, we have an evergreen fund, so it's just continuing, but it will be full by next year if we can't find more investors, and then we have to say no to the social enterprises that need our help. So I think this is the main thing. And then I think maybe in some cases we could have, increased our risk and said yes to a few more, but it's also tricky because we're working with vulnerable groups. And if we think that they might go bankrupt soon, even if we take most of the risk, we know that we might put them in a worse position because they always invest some of their, at least a lot of their time, but also some of their private money into this. And if we don't believe in their case, I don't think we should go there. But yeah, maybe I think one thing we could do that I hope that we will also is to increase the size of the average size of our credits and guarantees. So we could actually take a bigger share of, instead of just 25, maybe we could take like 40% of the total investment or so. I think this would make it easier for the associations. They wouldn't have to crowdfund as much, or and so on, and it would be better for our own sustainability as well. Yeah.
Okay, so last, if I may, just regarding what you mentioned, Ilva, a relationship with potential or actual investors. How can you sum up your experience regarding these connections, all this story of mobilizing money? Thank you.
Yes, I think it's difficult in Sweden. We need a cultural shift because we are used to letting the welfare take care of us, and now we have more and more millionaires and billionaires, and we don't have a culture of philanthropy. We think that, oh, the state will take care of this, but they don't anymore. We have liberalized and changed. We don't have such a strong state anymore. So it's a lot about, arguing with organizations and funds, etc., with a lot of resources that maybe they should take a bigger social responsibility. So this is a very slow journey for us. It's been easier with international investors like Impulse and Fed also, and some others who are already working with social impact and who are like aligned with our mission. But they are a bit expensive, and we try to be very cheap in relation to the social enterprises we finance. So it's tricky. Yeah. And my dear colleague Ingrid, I'm CEO and Ingrid is the credit manager of Mikrofonden Sweden. So you had a comment as well, Ingrid.
Yes, thank you, Ylva. Yes, I just wanted to mention, since you said like our 3 prioritized areas is like the local development part is like been the largest in numbers of beneficiaries, and work integration social enterprises has also been like a big part, an important part, and as you could see, the number of housing units or like housing is not as large, but it's one of the priority areas, and we're just working on how to increase the volume here, because it's like here we have there is like larger amounts needed, and we could see that there is a need for like the intermediary that can and that a more risk willing impact investor that could take like 10 to 20% of the total volume, the total project needed, and would then go into bigger numbers. So we're looking at this, and it's been a work going on for several years, but there's like a movement that has been building very much since like 2018, at least, like longer, but more and more the last years, and there's more and more stronger network and projects around this. But it's also, this is something that has been developing much more in other parts of Europe when it comes to cooperative housing and co-building and so on, and we're still struggling a bit here, and we do not have at all the state priority or like the political priority which would be needed. But there is a lot of work going on in some of the municipalities and regions that are interested in this. So this is an area, like if you have any idea or advice of European impact investors or instruments that could be helpful for us in this area, we would be grateful to so please contact us if you have any ideas on this. Thank you.
Excellent.
I can only tell that Impulse is also investing in cooperative housing. They are part of a big project in Spain. Of course, you may if you speak with Bruno, he can explain you in detail how they have organized the financial and operative scheme of a large project of a cooperative housing in Spain. Of course, requiring much more money. We're talking about millions, because it's a long term, meaning loans that can reach, I think, 25 or 30 years, as a payback period, because it's, of course, when you talk about housing, you have to think on a long-term basis. So I would suggest you could maybe go deeper in discussions with Impulse on this.
Yeah, we did, and our conclusion there was that we will try to co-invest, because it will get too expensive if they invest in Mikrofonden, but we might be able to find the cases where we co-invest instead. But it's an interesting example.
Okay, so thank you very much for this great introduction. Now I will share my screen with you. Can you see it? Yeah, perfect. So I just wanted to start with where Ilva has left off. So in terms of the impact assessment journey, I have to stress that Mikrofonden is really a small organization, and the amount of work and how far you've come is just amazing with the resources that you have at hand. So when we started this almost a year ago, this discussion, right? You already had kind of an impact report, and you had started working with the local organization, and there's kind of the Swedish guideline for it, etc. But we were wondering, can we streamline it a little bit, right? Because you have a quite diverse portfolio. So we thought, can we put it in like larger categories or buckets and streamline it, because it needs to stay manageable, right? It's meaningful, but still manageable. And kind of this is the chart that Ilva also showed, where we said kind of we can cluster most of your investments, not all of them, but most of them in the three categories. And what are kind of common indicators, so on a horizontal level, that are equally valid for all of these categories. So kind of this was kind of these were the overarching guidelines or ideas that we applied to then kind of sorting and deciding what do we want to do. And then this was really kind of an iterative process, right? So we had a meeting and we discussed, and then we kind of both sides went back and thought about it, and then we kind of had a next meeting and kind of slowly peeled away all these layers of the onion until at the end of the day we came up with this overview, which I like a lot, because it also, and it only captures the output, but also kind of the outcome, which is similar across these three categories, right? And your overarching objective, you said at the beginning, is financial inclusion for social enterprises in Sweden, right? You want to enable access to finance for these companies through these three verticals, columns, categories, whatever you call them. And another kind of, at the end of the day, this is not a means by itself, but the higher kind of objective is that you want to change lives, and you also want to empower kind of underrepresented groups. And I think that became very clearly that this is also present in all of these three categories. And this then kind of goes back into the overall vision of Mikrofonden. So what is the overall objective? What is your purpose? And I think it kind of really nicely came together in that chart. So this is kind of where we had left off. And just kind of going back to, because you asked kind of what is meaningful assessment, what is good, and we stayed with outcome and not went into impact, so kind of deducting all the external effects, etc. So an outcome study should tell you the extent to which the participation or exposure to a certain program altered the result to what have happened anyways in the absence of that intervention, right? So kind of this cooperative for the women is active, and what would have happened with the point. In order to do so, you should kind of endline assessment, right? So the baseline measurement is at the beginning before the project starts, and then you maybe have measurements across the way or assessments across the way, and you have one at the end. In your specific case, right, because you've already invested, you don't have this original baseline, right? So just kind of as a comment here, if you don't have that, for example, you could ask people retrospectively what they thought about the intervention and if that made a difference. A little bit what you did with the additionality, right? And trying to kind of rebuild this baseline, or you take the first year of investment as your baseline and then track it from there. But then you might not capture everything, right? Just kind of to highlight this difficulty with the baseline assessment, and then starting once you've already invested, just to kind of raise awareness that the way how you frame it and how you describe it later on in your impact report, that they might be in some cases if you use the baseline. And going forward, right, before you invest, it might make sense integrating this in your investment process going forward, that you do one round of assessment before the investment to establish the baseline, just as an idea. Okay. But please, Ilva, Ingrid, step in and ask questions, right, if anything is unclear or I should go in more detail. Okay.
There is something with your internet connection,
You
Barbara.
or
We didn't hear you now.
here I continue. You didn't hear me?
Did it freeze for everyone?
Am I back?
Now
I
you're
can still
back.
hear you.
Yeah, I think the last slide, we didn't hear what you said. Maybe.
No, I can't hear you.
Barbara, do you want to switch off your camera?
We'll see if she gets kicked out again. I can definitely share my PowerPoint, but
can you am I back? Can you hear me?
yeah, now you're back.
No.
or did she? Yeah, you're there. You just you're muted now.
But I'm back. I'm back.
You're back. There was a question about if we will share PowerPoints. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, absolutely. When did you use me?
Maybe you switch off your camera?
Yeah. After talking about the end line assessment, when
the baseline? Okay.
Yeah, so when you change slide, we didn't hear you.
Okay, apologies for that. Okay, but now
No
you
problem.
can see and hear me. You can see and hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so process. This is a process chart, right? So you start with defining, that's called in statistics the universe. So what's the population? So all the women, let's stay with this example, right, that have been imprisoned and then leave and qualify for that program, that would be your universe, right? And it can be a finite number, so you know it, or it's kind of an uncertain number of elements, but you need to know, have an idea of what is the overall group that potentially you could ask. So everyone in that program you could ask, right? Then what's the unit? And that could be, it's usually a person, but it could also be a school or a state or a district. What are you interested in? Or that specific cooperative. And then the sample size. Yeah. But it doesn't always have to be a person. So the sampling unit, for example, if this is about improving housing quality, you could look at the apartments or at the house as the sampling unit. This is the point I wanted to make here. There's something in the chat. Just wanted to check the chat.
So to make it practical, could you say, like, so we currently have 45 social enterprises in our portfolio, more or less, I think. And then they reported to us that they work with in total almost 39,000 people. So I guess that's
the universe.
Is that our universe? Yeah.
If it's all people, right? So if it's apartments and you in the housing vertical and it's about improving housing quality, it might also be the apartment. And then you check it has improved by 10% or if it's the right. So it mostly probably it's people. But it could also be a family, right? The kind of some interventions targeting entire families. So just for raising awareness that usually it's individuals, but it could also be a group like a family, or it could be a unit like an apartment. So this is kind of the overall pie. So how do you sample? And they kind of do two large categories of sampling. One is called probability sampling and one is called non-probability sampling. So the first one, and I'll walk you through that, is simple random sampling. So the idea is kind of you list everyone, all 33,000, for example, or you list them by intervention, let's say, and then you randomly select them. And Excel has a very nice function, if you Google that, and there are YouTube videos, right, to really make it kind of independent and objective. So you have a long list, probably per enterprise. These are the people that they're working with. And then randomly you select them, and these are the people that you ask. Okay. So you totally objectively and randomly select people out of this entire universe. As a kind of a different approach, or a kind of a complementary approach, is so-called stratified random sampling. So this is if you're in a particular subgroup, for example, part of that cooperative, but only in the women, for example, right? Or only in people that have a migration background, or only people that have a physical disability, right? So then if you do the general random sampling, so the left part, the first part, you might not have enough from the subgroup that you're particularly interested, but you divide that into different groups, right? That group, right? So for the women, and again, wow.
Are you still there, Barbara?
I'm here, yes.
Yeah.
But I was gone, right?
A short while. Yeah. So
I'm trying.
so just to exemplify then from our portfolio, could this be, say that we already have these 3 categories who in themselves are subgroups, but then we could also have like subgroups within that, you know, for example, when it comes to rural development, we already created these kind of subgroups, the ones who are working with local grocery stores, the one who are working with, for example, like welfare services. So we could like take some samples from each
for example. Exactly. And
you
don't, so very practically, because you ask what is good enough. And I think we also talked about this when we had talked about the larger overview. You don't have to do everything every year, right? So maybe one year you focus on women. And then the next year you have a closer look at daycare centers. And the year after you have a closer look at supermarkets, right? So probably trying to do everything all the time from the beginning is too much and is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, this is up to you, right? And your resources and your capacity. But I would probably with the whys, if there's no distinction, or in the housing, depends, right? But I would do like the random sampling if possible, if you can reach out to them directly, because then it's really kind of objective. And it's really just the chance that selects who gets asked. So there's no influence on who you're asking. So it has the highest validity if you cannot ask everyone. And then for 1 or 2 sectors or subsectors, you try the stratified piece, right? You select a subgroup, and then you say, I randomly select within that subgroup to have enough of supermarket people that run a co-op supermarket represented. Yeah. So if you can do this, that will be kind of statistically excellent.
But one tricky thing I want to ask you about is that, so we are hoping that it will be the social enterprises that collect this data for us, because we don't have resources to travel all over Sweden to meet people in their local communities. But this also, of course, increases the risk that, you know, they will choose the the person who had the biggest impact, or, you know, like that. It isn't necessarily that way, actually. Like, for example, we asked maybe I shouldn't say this. We asked one of the housing cooperatives for an impact story, and then they interviewed their most well-off member of the community, which was like, okay, this person didn't have an impact at all, but I guess they took that person because it was the most well, you know, how do I say?
Easiest to reach, maybe.
Most well, what I'm not right now formulated. Someone who can put it in a good way, like to make it easy to write.
Let me walk you through the non-probability sampling pieces, and then you kind of some of that I think will come apparent, and then we can discuss kind of what that would mean and how you could implement it, right? So non-probability sampling means there's some kind of bias involved on top of kind of the bias that could occur because the random sampling picks the wrong people, but it's a built-in bias. Convenience means you simply involve anyone who is available and willing to take part in the survey. Yeah. So anyone kind of that comes into the supermarket, you leave the questionnaire in the waiting room of the daycare center, right? The partners reach out to people they know well. Then you still have a subgroup. It's still a sample, but it's a so-called convenience sample. And I mean, all of these disadvantages that you already mentioned, right? So maybe those that are easier to engage are also maybe more engaged with the service, right? So the direct correlation between how often do they use the service and then are they also willing to participate? So maybe they provide a more favorable view or they have a biased view and because of another reason. So the convenience sampling is still better than not having anything, but has certain drawbacks. Quota sampling is also convenience sampling, but a little bit more robust. So the idea is if you have 60% women and 40% men in a group that you want to survey, right? And then you reach out through convenience sampling. You put the survey put it out in the waiting room, right? But from what you actually analyze, you keep the original weights and the representation of these two groups, right? So 60% of the answers need to come from women and 40% need to come from men, for example. So kind of this representativeness in the entire population, you also make sure that this is represented in the sampling, even if it's a convenience. If you do totally random sampling, you can't influence this. If you want to influence the women and the men and the representativeness of the two groups, you have to do this stratified, so with the subgroups. But you can make the convenience sampling a little bit more robust with this. So for example, if you say we need 6 survey questionnaires filled out by women and 4 by men, and one woman says, I don't want to do it, then you have to find another woman and not another man to replace that in order to have it still be representative, right? And then kind of the purposive sampling is also called a snowball sampling. So you're trying to go beyond those that are easy to reach. So you ask someone to ask someone else, and then they ask to someone else. So the participants recruit others, not the social enterprise. That might give you a bit more reach. But these, and I'll go back maybe to the overview slide. So these are kind of the 5 methods. Now, in terms of implementation, if you want to have certain subgroups represented, either through a probability sampling or non-probability sampling, I think you need to tell the social enterprise, right? You have to tell them kind of, we need 60% filled out by women or 40% by participants that come from a lower income background, etc. I think this is, you need to give that guidance to the social enterprise, or when they give you the data, you sort out everything that does not fit into your prescribed framework of representation. So 60-40 or certain groups that need to be included, right? I don't know if it would work if they sent you Excel sheets with participants or stakeholders and you randomize it for them. If that could be a way, right? They'd tell you these are all the 150 people that come to our program. And then you do it kind of with an Excel formula very easily. And then you tell them, please ask these 10 people. I mean, it's additional work for you, right? But you don't have to go yourself and get the information. Maybe this could be a middle ground a little bit. Ingrid, yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. I just wanted to to mention how difficult this is, like, or to give a perspective, because it's like, I mean, first of all, like, I mean, we're very small, cooperative and limited in resources, but then our target group, I mean, we do have one WISE consortium that are, like, as Ylva showed also, they have come very far, and they're they have data on empowerment and life improvement and all of that, while we had other WISE that are very limited and have not come as far at all. But there, regarding WISE, they have, of course, they know which people are employed and so on, while an NGO, like a small NGO, yeah, they know who are the members, but they don't have the names of, like, all the people that maybe take part in their activities. And we have now, I just want to problematize a bit on this, on how to sample, like how to do surveys and so on, how to collect the data, because we did in a project, a pre-study, where we tried to use a survey we both had experts or people from different parts of the social economy in one region of Sweden, and then to find out, like, what are the needs, how does social economy actors, different kinds of social enterprises, what type of finance do they need, what type of finance do they use, what type of funds, what type of capital and so on do they have or use, and what do they need. And we tried to find out, and we thought that, okay, well, we use a survey, and then we also have these we had a few number of experts from different parts of the sector that were also doing interviews and directly sending this survey directly out in their networks within their organizations, to other organizations, contacting people and asking them to fill in the survey. And also when they saw it was very difficult to get responses to the survey, they had interviews and they helped to fill in the survey during the interviews. And we reached out to hundreds of people and a huge number of organizations in this region, all parts of the social economy. And we got 19 responses. And so we did, like, a big effort to really, like, get in data. And we had people with time during a project during this year to collect data and help us collect data. And it was really, really difficult. And we got in, I mean, the results we got was, like, it didn't give us, like, enough data to draw any conclusions from that. So yeah, this is just, I would just want to mention, like, how difficult this is, and how we cannot, like, I just see how it's also such a big, and I think I'm glad you say, like, we could do, like, maybe we could start with those that are more on the forefront and have more resources to do this, and then we will have to look at how could we do this within these areas where we have, like, NGOs or so on with very, very limited resources, where this would be like a very big, heavy burden. So I think we need to really work with the balance between the craving for, the need for, the request for impact measurement, and how we have to show impact, and what is actually possible, and what burden should we put on social economy actors and cooperatives and NGOs with very limited resources, that need all the time and resources they have to do their work, to create impact. So I'm just, like, I want to stress again what Ylva mentioned about research. Like, we are not researchers, and our target group is definitely not within the capacity and of doing this kind of work, and which are researchers that are doing. So I'm just thinking, how do we balance here, and how do we make sure we're not putting too much burden on our target group, and also small microfinance actors, social finance actors.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is the theory, right? And then comes in the request by your funders, right? What level of detail do they want? What rhythm do they want? Do they want an annual impact report? Are they okay with a biannual report? Do they want quarterly numbers? Do they want a full sampling, right? They might have the question, well, how do you know this is representative? So kind of this should equip you with the means to be able to kind of answer to these questions. And I think then it's kind of a balance of what is required from you by your funders, because probably they will be the most demanding ones, right? And then kind of it's what can you actually fulfill? What are your resources? What are your capacities? And I think if the funders don't require it annually on the outcome level, I don't know, right? Maybe then you say, well, every year we report an output, because that's already a lot, the number of beneficiaries, the funding volumes, etc. And then every year we take a different vertical and we look at outcome data, for example, right? So next year it's WISE, the year after it's the housing co-ops, the next one is the local development. But I think this is largely driven by what your funders require you to report.
Yes. And I would say, I think it's also about, like, so we are mainly, our operational funding comes mainly from project grants. And I think it's also about, I mean, for us to include this as maybe like consultant cost and so on in future grants. Because I think, for example, this work integration social enterprise who are very good at impact measurement, I mean, they haven't done it themselves. They have run projects where they could, you know, hire this macroeconomic guy, etc. So, but of course, it should be, you know, it has to be related to what is actually requested, like from investors and grant
how often
providers.
does FERT, like what is FERT's, for example, rhythm and requirement?
Yeah, one time per year, and they seem to be quite happy with just the output data. They think that's enough. Because it's also, I think, you know, you can discuss, you know, for when it comes to, you know, then start measuring, next step, start measuring impact, and you would have to have a reference group, etc. And I think, like, maybe, you know, if you work at the university and you're a researcher, that's interesting. But I think for like common people, it's like, you know, anyone can just, okay, this NGO, they wouldn't be able to start if they didn't get money. And like, why should we try to have a group of people who want to start something great and test not giving them access to funding, you know, or like, you know.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It needs to be proportionate to the resources, also to the funding. But yeah, I mean, if they're happy with output, that's fine. I know that EIF requires more and that they have a denser rhythm, right? And then there are funds that require monthly data. So this is, I think, the spectrum that is out there. So also kind of when you look for money, that you take, like, keep this as a consideration, right? What is required if they invest in us in terms of, because there are funds that require monthly outcome data.
So with Impulse, we do quarterly. And what I understood from this EIF social economy guarantee was that was also quarterly. But I think the quarterly reporting is quite simple. It's just the share of entrepreneurs who are women, who are migrants, who are startups, etc. And I think, I mean, this we
so
have
on the output level. It's on the output level also.
Yeah. We have.
I mean, this is with everything that we also developed so far, right? This is the large, full picture, full comprehensive picture, right? And then you choose the bits and pieces that you say that you're specifically interested in because you would like to raise funds for women, right? So you want to demonstrate impact that you've generated so far in that field to then go and approach dedicated funders with that data, right? Or kind of somebody approaches you and then requests outcome data on a quarterly basis, and then you have to implement it. But so that you're prepared, that you have the tools at your disposal, and that if you have. And very often, of course, we start with a non-probability sampling, the convenience sampling. Are we happy if we get any responses at all, right? It's just that if you look, for example, at kind of empowerment is one of your parameters. If you then have responses only from men, there's only so much you can say about the empowerment, right? So just knowing kind of what are the advantages and drawbacks of the different approaches. And then the convenience, like many start there with the convenience, and then maybe the quota, looking at the representativeness of certain groups, right? And then going to more random sampling going forward. And that if you have a funder that is asking for something, that you can talk the language, right? That you can tell them, right now we kind of have convenience samples. It's not 100% representative. It's not 100% of the population, right? We are aware of that. We are aware of that potential bias. And then you have an asterisk in the impact report to that funder saying that's the response from that convenience sample. We have all the output data, and then we have this indication for outcome with the caveat that there might be a bias, that not all groups are represented, and so on and so forth, right? So that you are equipped to lead these discussions. Jörg, yeah?
Ylva first.
You were first, but okay. I can just mention that, I mean, we have been working with more like desktop studies of outcome. So like not data from our portfolio, but, you know, more like there are studies about the importance for rural communities to get access to local grocery stores, for example. Like the Swedish state has conducted research about like the economic effects and the social effects and so on. So like in our impact report, we have tried to, you know, sometimes more refer to bigger studies that have been done on the topic, or like the importance of work integration, social enterprises, you know, research that shows that this is a very efficient method of like moving people from long-term unemployment and so
you
on.
can use that. I'm just looking for, because I don't have the slide, I'm just looking for a slide on that, because there is a very nice slide that is exactly highlighting this. Hold on, it's in a different deck, but this one. And you've probably seen that before in one of my trainings. Okay. So this is not how you sample, but one level above, right? Kind of what of approach can you take to collect data? This is data collection methods. And there's always a trade-off between the expenditure on the vertical level. What does it cost? How much time do I need to do that? And then the reliability of the information on the horizontal level, right? And then the green methods are rather qualitative, emotionally convincing, and then you have kind of more evidence-based methods. These are the blue ones. And very often organizations think, well, if I do impact measurement, I have to start in the upper right-hand corner with a longitudinal study with control groups. I collect all the data myself, and I have a control group, and it's all representative, and it's a large sample, and so on and so forth. But you don't have to start there. For many organizations, they neither have the capabilities, nor the time, nor the resources to do that. And you can start with anecdotal evidence, like the stories that you showed, right? The case studies. That is the first step, of course. And then you try to, if you can, have the time and the resources to make it more evidence-based, right? Then you count the number of participants, you do interviews, you do focus groups, you do surveys, and so on and so forth. So, and you can tap into what is already existing, right? For example, in the your logic model should start with, well, we're doing this because there's evidence that if we're doing this, this has an impact. And you can kind of rely on these studies, right? This is also kind of part of the case study approach that you say it has been done before in another region, for example, but it has yielded impact there. And therefore we think it is highly likely that it will yield impact in another Swedish city as well. And you should do that. You kind of, if there's secondary data that you can rely upon, you should use that. And you don't have to go into the blue one, not at all. If you want to go into the blue one, then you have to think about the data, like the sampling, right? And who do you ask, etc. But on a higher level, use what is already there, and then work your way with kind of start with the green data collection methods and move your way up to the upper right-hand corner, I would say. But for many, it doesn't make sense if you invest 500,000 euros and you do a long-term study, which costs 300,000 euros over 10 years. It doesn't make sense at all. So it also needs to be in proportion to the actual investment. Stop sharing here. Jörg.
Well, one of the issues we observe is, and it's following up on what Ingrid shared. You sent out a survey. Ideally, you would like to have, I don't know, 75%, 80% response rate. But then,
not gonna happen.
yeah, but then, you end up with 19.
Yeah.
And you can start with the pre-intervention or start of intervention and make it part of the process, part of the intervention, and then end of intervention to collect data. But then you want to see 6 months later, 12 months later, what actually happened. And this is so difficult to get that data. And I think this is also something that should be part of the impact reports. Like, okay, this is what we did. What I have done in the past, and my experience, people don't like questionnaires. So sorry, Barbara. If you talk to researchers, they come up with really fantastic scales, 2, 3, 4 different scales. You end up with 120 questions. No one's going to answer that. If you boil it down, and then you still, in order to have something meaningful, you still end up with 40 questions. But sometimes you're lucky if people answer 3 questions, right? So this purposive sampling, I think, can be really helpful, so that you really purposively choose, for example, beneficiaries of a program where you have the feeling, oh, it went really well, but also those where you have the feeling, oh, I'm not sure that it was useful at all. So that it's not this story selling or greenwashing. I don't know if social washing does exist.
Blue washing.
Yeah, okay, blue washing. So, but you really try to understand what happened, why, and use that on purpose to say, okay, the program can be improved. This is something that went really well. And what can be helpful is to look for a few interviews. So, and here, it's not about the numbers, but really about the quality of the interviews, and use that as like, okay, we have some indication, it's not valid for all, but what we see here is in those cases, like when we work with women, we have a selected few where it works really well. This is where we have mixed results, or where we're not sure it was useful at all, and use the narratives. And there, if you have 4, 5, 6 really good interviews, there's a lot you can see from that. So, and also, it's not easy to get those interviews or organize a focus group, and that needs experience as well. But it's probably easier than trying to chase 150 persons to complete a questionnaire. But again, this is how I would do it. Let's see what Barbara has to say to that.
No, I think like it goes back to the overall objective of impact assessment, and that's not about reporting numbers. It's about understanding what works and making what works better, and stopping doing what doesn't work, right? So I think kind of this, there's a specific term for this methodology that you mentioned. You choose the best case and you choose the case, and then you infer from the difference what works and what doesn't work. And I think kind of the learning from that is amazing to see how it can improve some programs, and this should be the ultimate purpose of impact assessment, right? But I agree that sometimes, or very often, the interviews are easier to conduct, and then if you do focus groups, it's basically kind of interviews with a larger group. I think in your specific case, what you're already doing, you collect the output data in a quantitative way. That's fantastic. And then you accompany that by anecdotal evidence, right, on the outcome level. And then you need to decide how much further do you want to, and can you go? And this, I think, depends on many influencing factors. One is funder's request. I think that's the number one, right? Do you have a funder who wants monthly outcome data, or is specifically interested in this one data point in outcome because it's a gender fund or whatever, right? Then you have to collect that data. I think then there's no way around that if you want to get that funding. So kind of, I think funders requests is one influencing factor, one criteria. The other one is your resources. I think that's the next one in terms of priorities. What's your capability, your capacity, etc. The third one is data availability. Is it possible, even if you kind of are interested in getting the data and you would have the resources to do it, can you get the data at all, right? Is there a chance to get through the final beneficiary, yes or no? And then what is your strategic interest? I think kind of choosing topics, like focus topics per year on a yearly basis maybe makes sense, right? If you say housing now is the main priority, you want to better understand housing, what works, what doesn't work. You want to attract funding in the area of housing. You want to raise awareness for housing. Then I would, for the next 2-3 years, maybe look deeper into the housing topic, and maybe look at one indicator or one outcome, a piece of information that you could collect. But I think this is how I would think about it: kind of output in a quantitative level, and then supported by anecdotal evidence and cases on the outcome level, and then depending on funding requirements, your capacity, data availability, and strategic interests, how much further do you go in terms of the actual assessment and data collection?
I can just comment briefly. So what we did also in our latest impact report is that we did more like in-depth interviews with one case per focus area, and that was published as an impact story as well, that where we more like, how did this change your life, like story. Perfect. Which I think was useful. But then also I think one aspect is, I mean, we're not just doing this to like prove that we are good, or like because we really want this data. I think one thing is also that we kind of want to nudge our portfolio companies into being more aware about how they actually create impact. So I think one part of this is to make them, evaluate more. Maybe like in that sense, I think this empowerment part is very important. That like when it comes to social enterprises and cooperatives and NGOs, it's very different from organization to organization how well they work with this. And when we see all these different, we can see that some are using methods or like participatory strategies that are really efficient in increasing the self-empowerment of their members and so on, and like kind of trying to create an awareness about that. So I think this is also something we have to think about. Like, still, I mean, we can't put too much pressure on them, and we can't like force them into doing things that they don't want to do. But still, we can kind of push them a bit, maybe, into reflecting more and actually getting more information from their like final beneficiaries about how they actually affect them and how they could affect them even more, maybe if they just slightly change their way of operating.
And I think there are 2 levels on that, right? So this is what you're doing, like this would be capacity building, and many funds do that kind of as the non-financial support, that they bring together their portfolio companies either on functional topics, for example, how to think about your theory of change, right? How to do data collection and so on, what does impact mean, and so on and so forth, or like in these verticals that you bring together all the Ys or the housing co-ops and all those companies that run a daycare center, etc., and then exchange best practices. And I think that can be very powerful because it's often very lonely in the impact field, right? And I mean, their reason for being and getting up in the morning is that they want to provide the best service possible to their stakeholders. So they have a very genuine interest in getting better at what they do and hopefully learning from others. In theory, I know in practice sometimes there are other mechanisms at play, right? But I think in theory, on both levels, kind of the impact assessment piece, and then, but this also requires resources. So capacity building also requires resources, right? And at some point, you have to make the call between, do we add more value by looking at more funding requests, right? And structuring more investments, or do we add more value by providing organizational capacity, and then which kind of organizational capacity? Yeah. Raphael?
Thank you. You have been mentioning funders or investors' requests, requirements to put money up front. What is your experience regarding, are they really aware of the costs involved in impact assessments? Are they really prepared to increase their financial contribution to cover up exactly these costs? Okay, when I hear you both saying that some investors, some funders want monthly reports, quarterly reports, are they really aware of what that does it mean? You know, and can we, when we organize the budget, or if they require a budget to show off what the costs involved, and can we include a budget line of impact assessment, and this costs this amount of money, and you have to pay for it. If that's your requirement, then you have to increase your contribution. Thank you. What is your experience with this?
Yeah, everything exists. Like different kind of approaches exist. From what for example, Bond Venture for me in Germany is really a best practice. So they have already 10 years ago decided, when kind of impact investing was, it's still kind of by many seen as a burden, and it's kind of doesn't really add value in the first place, and it's costly and so on and so forth. But they said, no, we want to have systematic impact assessment of the investments that we do. What does that mean? So on the fund level, for example, they have a baseline assessment that they require. Then they have monthly data that in the baseline assessment and during the due diligence process gets decided together with the portfolio company on these are the 2-3 indicators that we want to have reported every month. So they decide together. And then very often also the payment of certain investment tranches is linked to achieving certain impact milestones. They have someone in their fund, there's one full-time person dedicated to coordinating this, the impact officer. She would probably say she would need twice that capacity, but they have a dedicated person. What they're trying to do, and this is where it gets tricky, thanks Camilla, bye, is on the enterprise level, right? Because you need to empower them to be able to think through their logic model, collect the data, analyze the data, etc. And they had at some point started some workshops where they try to upskill their portfolio companies to be able to do that and to report that. Is that enough? I don't know. What I've seen in the last 10 years, this at the beginning, so 10 years ago when they started with this very heavy focus on impact assessment and impact analysis, that portfolio organizations were very hesitant, right? And this is another burden, and it's costly, and we don't know how to do it, and we would rather spend our time, right, working with the people that we're doing this for. And over time, this perception has changed. So now if you are an investee by Bond Venture, this means you have a proven impact, right? It's kind of a seal of quality that what you're doing is really good, and helps you fundraise with others. It's more easily because you've proven, like you one of the most strictest impact investors, right, has invested in you. So that says something. And they now use this more proactively. While at the beginning it was very reactive. So the funder is requiring, so I have to do it. They now use it more proactively. Is it enough in terms of support? I think more could be done, right? This is something where we try to work on with in the first technical assistance, right? That we kind of also designed these kind of workshops for funds and their portfolio organizations.
So what was their name again?
Bond Venture in Germany.
Bond Venture.
Bond Venture.
Thank you.
Bond Venture. Yeah. So I still think more should be done, but there's a very low willingness to pay for these impact assessment services. Still, right? Everybody says it would be great to have, it would be nice to have, but I think as long as the real value isn't shown in terms of I get better at what I do. This was the other insight, right? Many of Bond Venture's portfolio organizations said, well, I've become better at what I do through this process. Even if I hated it at the beginning, I've become better at what I do. I have more impact and I have the seal of approval. As long as you can demonstrate that, it'll always be a very reactive, burdensome exercise, I'm afraid. Yeah. But I think, I mean, this is something we've pitched to the commission many times. I think much more can be standardized, right? You can standardize templates. You can have standardized workshops, right? You could like design an online course for that for portfolio organizations, which is then accompanied by office hours, because there's still, I think, this need for individualization and individual support, right? But a lot could be standardized upfront in terms of material templates, in terms of trainings. I think more could be done, but then who would pay for that? That's the question, right? And I think it would need to be a public funder or a grant scheme to do that. Sorry, it was a long answer, but this is a little bit what I've seen. But I've also seen, and we see this with EIF, right? 5 years ago, EIF didn't ask for impact data. Now they ask, it's more output data and it's quarterly, right? But I think it'll move towards more stringent impact assessment, because there'll be less and less money, right? So you have to be more careful and how you invested. So how do you make this decision in the social sector, how to allocate your money, who's getting less and less and less and less? This is a political discussion, but I believe that, yeah, it'll become even more important. And we would need some kind of public training scheme to enable the sector to reply to these new demands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
research programs. I'm thinking like more universities interested
There's
in.
so much you could do. There's so much you could do over. There's
Yeah.
kind of also, we had this idea of like an open access database, because I mean, many things have been done somewhere before, right? Like there are housing cooperatives in many countries. There are work integration social enterprises in most of the European countries. And there is research, and you would need to structure it and in a systematic way, and then put it in a database that if women in this age bracket, in this socioeconomic context, if you do this intervention, this is the range, right, of impact that you'll get. It doesn't need to be perfect, right? But you need to have some kind of information to build upon. Yeah. But so far we haven't found anyone kind of that would be interested in setting up this kind of database with the, I would guess per SDG, probably 100 interventions, proven interventions that exist, and then have a public access to the database. And then you could kind of draw, right, from this data and say, okay, this has been done there. So we believe that if we fund this, it'll also have impact in Sweden. Yeah.
So last week, the director of DG Employment said, well, one of the most important indicators is poverty reduction for DG Employment and everything related. Okay, that's good. So we know.
What was it? Public?
Poverty reduction.
Poverty reduction. Okay.
Because that is the main argument for DG Employment to receive funding, like also for the next funding period and the programs and ESF and what have you not. Also the availability of guarantees, other funded instruments. And this can change. So, but as you said, Barbara, I think the easiest way forward is to predefine impact pathways and substantiate that a little bit with research. I mean, universities are in a privileged position because they have access to all this research, and it would be crazy expensive if you buy these articles, and no one is going to pay for that. There's a way I call cheating, but it's a way. So if you look, for example, at Consensus AI, and you ask a question, what's the social impact of microfinance in Europe? You don't get really good results, but you get an overview. And then you have some indicators within 10, 15 minutes. You can also get something like a literature review, like with 50 articles. Then you have to select what's relevant for you, what's not. So maybe you end up with 20 useful articles. And this is only publicly available articles. So either they're directly linked so that you can download the PDF, but you can use this information and summarize that and say, okay, what we see in the research, and this is transferable because, so that's the argument you need to build. And then you try to substantiate that with the data that's available for you. And again, it's not super good. I wouldn't highly recommend it, but it can be a good starting point. And I totally agree with what Barbara said. We definitely need to have something like a database with what evidence is available, what do we see, what works, what doesn't, where, why not.
Yeah, I have in the slide deck, Ilva and Ingrid, I also have something on response rates. But so response rate is a tricky thing, right? Because of course we would like to have something above 50%, but if we get 5%, usually it's already really, really good. So it really also depends on always on the context and how you argue which response rate you were targeting. But I'm not sure that you really need it at this point, right? Because if you report your output data and you say kind of reporting outcome with proprietary data collection, it might be too much. So your question, what is good enough? I think having your framework plus the output data plus kind of the impact stories, that's already very, very good as compared to the other, like the benchmark in the sector. And given your resources and everything. So yeah, I think knowing where kind of you would like to go, what you'd like to know in a perfect world is very helpful as kind of a guiding star. But I don't think that you need to kind of collect data in a representative way from a larger sample, for example, on the decrease of loneliness anytime soon. No, I don't think, especially if your funders don't request it and require it. Yeah, I think it's not necessary at this point of time. So much to your question, is it good enough? But I mean, knowing kind of what it could look like, right? And what the larger picture looks like in a perfect world. And one day, kind of, if you have more funding or you want to dig deeper for special occasions, then you're prepared. Then you have all the tools available to say, okay, now we have this funder who is specifically interested in, I don't know, increasing the empowerment of women in a specific region. And then you can go and demonstrate, right, that you have expertise in that field. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions, any comments?
Yeah, I think like one reflection from my side here is that, you know, probably it's kind of up to our investors or grant providers to define, hopefully together with us, like what is good enough and what is requested, and that we kind of base what we do on that.
But you are in a, yeah, but you can be in the driver's seat in that discussion. I think from a negotiation standpoint, knowing what you could provide, knowing exactly kind of this is how our fund is set up, this is what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. I think, first of all, it's very professional. It shows kind of that you're serious, that you know what you're talking about, and you're in the driver's seat when it comes to these negotiations with the funders. Yeah. I think that's very helpful, because otherwise they might give you something, right, that you're going to have to implement that has nothing to do with what you're actually trying to do.
And that's also why I think it's great that we already have this, KPI matrix where we can say that, okay, we know this, we are experts in this field, and we think that this is the outcome that is important. So we could start collecting, and we have already prepared like the questions that we would,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you have the anecdotal evidence, you have the impact stories. Is it representative? No. Does it need to be representative at that point? Probably not. But and you have kind of this anecdotal evidence that what you're doing actually has impact. And I think this is exactly what you need to have at this point of time. And then going forward, you'll see how it evolves.
it's also very intuitive. I think that's also one of the reasons why we don't always have to prove everything. Like, for example, we know that 180 severely disadvantaged workers went from long-term unemployment to employment. And we do know that this will increase their income level from below the Swedish level of relative poverty into like a wage that you can actually live from in Sweden. So we don't have to, go and ask all of them, did this happen? Because it's just how the system works and people know that. So yeah, that's also something.
Ingrid?
Yes, thank you. I was thinking maybe you have already addressed this, but I'm thinking about this challenge. You mentioned, you talked about capacity building and educational activities and so on, because one challenge is like, I mean, since we have our overall objective of financial inclusion, and we at the same time have a very immature market where like for example we have and also what Ylva addressed, that we have a shift in Sweden where people like where the social economy actors, associations and so on mainly are very used to public funds and being heavily dependent on public funds, and that part is now decreasing, or the availability and the public resources are not enough, and there's more competition and so on. We have a shift towards like they need to find new models, they need to find new ways of income and new ways of financing, and then it becomes, that's one part. They also need other types of financing to complement, and also the situation where we have this like very long extended waiting times for payment of funds from like leader EU programs and so on, which now the last years has increased demands, and where we can see that we have to play a bigger role as like an intermediary, where like that we have to take like costs and work that is like actually caused by delays related to the EU funded systems. So, but I'm just like thinking about how to show the impact like to this bigger picture of like financial inclusion. Like I mean, now we'll need to look at the specific target groups and what we work with, but when we are like we want to make a change in this bigger, like in the social economy and increase social financial inclusion, and we want to show steps in increased financial inclusion. Like how do we do it in an immature market where like the organizations themselves, they do not always respond to that, they do not always see themselves as financially excluded, because they're used to, like, first they might not even have asked for a bank loan because they have not been working with that before, or they have already, maybe they got a loan on the third bank they asked, but they had to struggle and work for a very long time and so on. So it's just, yeah, it's really tricky how to show this the improvement in financial access. Sorry.
Do you feel that do you feel that because you report on the funding volume, right? Reporting on the funding volume plus you ask for additionality. So this information together, that's not enough. That doesn't capture the entire picture of the added value to this larger question of financial inclusion.
In a way, I think it does. I mean, before we were more, so we were looking at like the share of social enterprises who say that they didn't get access to finance because they were denied a bank loan or something like this, and like, oh, can we decrease that share, but that's, yeah, that was like too difficult to do it that way, because it also, as Ingrid mentioned, it has to do with some other things, like did the social enterprise even think that they could apply for a bank loan? It doesn't capture that. And also, like, are Mikrofonden to blame if they don't turn to us, for example? Like, okay, we didn't communicate enough.
And also the baseline problem here is like there is not enough statistics on the financial exclusion. Like, I mean, we have some kind of rough number, like, which I don't know how old it is now, that about 3% of limited companies are would you say denied a bank loan. And when it comes to work integration, social enterprises, there is a number from the Agency for Growth and so on, that is 23% that are denied bank loan. And there is like a smaller, more recent study on cooperatives that for some reason like they got the number 12% of younger cooperative up to 12 years old were denied, which then if they would have been looking at the normal startup age up to 3 years probably would be much higher. But like we don't have like that, we would need better like baseline numbers of like how many, and also like how to find that. I mean, the banks won't keep statistics on how many they like gatekeep, like how many they send off and deny. And we meet them often, like often they have tried many doors and ways before they come to us and find us. So yeah, this is, I'm just
Yeah. No, I mean, you know the number of social enterprises in Sweden, right? I remember that this number exists, and then you have kind of the funding volume that you provided to the sector. I think for this larger question, that's also something where you probably need other stakeholders and actors in the market to get their perspective. And that might be then rather also kind of an interview probably, right? How do you see the market now, 5 years ago, right? What is missing? Or a focus group with other stakeholders also in the market, representatives from the social enterprises, but maybe also representatives from the impact finance field. You'll never probably get this number, right?
And
But
one aspect that I think, I don't know if there is some work done somewhere else in the EU, but I mean, I think there are consequences from the financial regulations on that has increased heavily when it comes to banks and financial actors to prevent money laundering and so on. That this has also increased demand on everything we need to do to prevent and so on, which has made I think more banks, since banks are not like, they should not take any risks. And in Sweden, many NGOs, they are not registered, like they don't have registered board members. So we need, we know how to do it. Like we need to check who is in the board, and we need to have documentation on that, and we need to check like identities and all of that. But banks don't do that. So then I think there is an increase in like more associations denied bank loans, but also denied accounts and financial access to financial systems due to this more increased regulations, which are needed and necessary because the sector is also used for these purposes. But there should be, I hope there is some kind of research and follow up on the consequences for the social economy and NGOs and so on, that are now seen as risks, and even more riskier for banks and financial actors. So this is just another that like we see the problem, we see these challenges, like, but I mean, here we definitely need like researchers and larger projects. Like we cannot do this alone. We could, as you say, we could be like one piece in the puzzle pointing at the.
You need like an alliance or a stakeholder dialogue on a broader level.
But do you know of any?
I have to think, not spontaneously. No.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah, and Raphael, sorry, Raphael had his hand up. Yeah, you go ahead.
If you do an interview with bankers or other actors and look for a proxy, and a proxy question could be, how much time do you have for a loan decision? And it's surprisingly long. It's 15 to 20 minutes in Germany. So, and we're talking loans 100, 150,000. So that banks don't have this time to investigate. So, and if you have this number, so you would finance, but you don't really have time to assess that, and due to risk management, regulation, what have you not, you have to say no. And another question you can think of is, how many conversations do you have with a potential borrower? Like, and it could be that in the first conversation they have, they already is like, don't send a loan application, don't apply for a loan. Doesn't make sense. But it's not counted as a rejection, right? They don't count that. So, and just to add this information, and it's like, help people understand what's going on, where you don't need precise data, but you can say, okay, this is a limitation. Banks don't have the capacity. It's not that they don't want to do it, but due to risk management, other regulation, time restrictions, they are not able to be more active. And it's, I mean, very easy to understand, no?
Raphael, I'm sorry you had your hand up for quite some time.
No problem. What I wanted to share to our Swedish friends is that you are not alone on your reflections. I'm sure Jörg has recollected, has remembered many of these comments when he was with us in Azores last year, July last year. We had exactly the same conversation like this with questionnaires that we sent to micro enterprise, social enterprise organizations, with focus groups which organized in San Miguel. He was interacting with with your colleague Barbara Wolfgang. He was with us. Okay, so you have all this fight and all the you are so Sweden. You're not alone. Okay, on this fight, we have exactly the same problems, and most of the comments that Ylva and Ingrid have made are exactly the same in our case. Exactly the same. With the advantage that you are a lot of steps forward and over than us, and we are a lot of steps behind, because we are trying to build a financial instrument that will try to cover up these market gaps. And of course, I understand that you are also a big player in this jungle, let's say, but at least you have the advantage that maybe the market is open to players like you. In our case, it's even more difficult because the financial crisis that we suffered in Portugal 15 years ago, 12 years ago, made even more strict, everything has to do with loans, because as the country itself was bailed out, and then a number of big banks were also bailed out by European institutions, and of course the Portuguese state budget. This has created a scenario where things are even more difficult in this regard. As you mentioned, are social economy organizations reliable to receive a loan? How do they do operate? Who is responsible for the management of an organization like this? Where is equity? What is the financial soundness of an entity like this when there is no equity, there is no owners? So we are talking totally different languages. That's why making the bridges into these two different worlds is not that easy. Maybe when we have, and just to share with you, when we started the CIFTA agreement almost 2 years ago, Jörg, we started, and it was designed to build up a partnership of Cresasor with the regional bank, and in fact, Ylva and Ingrid, Cooperative Bank of Azores. 6 months later, they said, we are not interested. And then we had to reorganize the scope of our CIFTA agreement with Jörg and Wolfgang to see then how can we, what's the way out? That's where we are at the moment. So you're not alone, fortunately.
Yeah, and Rafael mentioned it, and we're always talking about kind of what else could be done. You're super well positioned. You're very, very much advanced, really, kind of, especially given the size of Mikrofonden, what you've produced so far is really impressive, right? So this is kind of at the very, very top, right? At the very, very top. If you want to go further, this is what you could do. It's more than good enough. It's really, you've done a great job in your impact report, and the data that you have and the way how you think about it is structured and it's clear, and you know exactly what you do and what you not do. So I just wanted to reiterate it, because we tend to then, in trainings only look at the things that can be improved, but there's always something that can be improved, right? But you're super well ahead. And I think like the success with the EIF, et cetera, this year has demonstrated, hopefully also to you, kind of the great work that you've done. Just wanted to iterate that once more, because it's more than good enough.
And funders have to accept that, or investors have to accept that.
And I mean, Rafael, honestly, I don't know, like many funds, many social enterprises don't have this very clear idea of what they're doing, what they're not doing. They do it by intuition, which is great, right? Or because there's kind of a historical development, or a personal affinity to certain causes. But having thought through that once and then knowing very clearly what you do and what you're not doing, and then gathering evidence on what you're doing, that's not the benchmark yet. Really not. So sorry, we had another question.
We're running out of time, but I would just like to comment shortly. I think what we have been discussing now in the last minutes is a lot about the root causes of this financial exclusion. And I think this is something we also, like in our impact reporting, we describe this as the root causes of why social economy is financially excluded. And I think something that has been important to us is that our impact measurement is not only focusing on the impact created by our investees, but also by ourselves, because we also see Mikrofonden as a kind of social enterprise. But I think, so I mentioned that we like try to think about, can we decrease the average financial exclusion in Sweden or something like this, but it didn't really seem feasible. But I think that, can you like correct me, Barbara, if I'm wrong, but now I'm thinking that like how we do it now is that our output is the number of social enterprises we finance per year, and the outcome is their answer to our question, like how important was our financing for your ability to create impact. So the fact that they gave us, most of them gave us 5 out of 5 review, I think that's that's kind of our internal impact, so to say. Our
the money is
internal
just
outcome.
the money is a means to an end, right? It's not so much about the funding volume, but what that money actually does on the ground.
Yeah.
And you made it happen, right? And kind of this additionality, assessing kind of, would that have happened without you? And the answer from like most of them is no. I think that that is the proof of why it's important that Mikrofonden exists, and the impact of your work, right? This additional, on top of kind of the improvement in the lives of all of these people, without you, it wouldn't have happened, right? So this is kind of the added value through the money. It's the money, but not kind of only the money, right? Yeah. There's different higher purpose to that as well. Was that helpful? Is there anything else you need to know?
Very good. Thank you. Very helpful.
I'll share the slides later on with you. I'll share them with you. If there's anything else, you like always send me an email, please. Okay, we can also kind of communicate back and forth. How far are you with EIF? Is it all kind of signed, sealed, and delivered, or?
The contract is
Ilva,
ready.
Ilva.
Yeah.
May I just add one before pass it to you? Is one thing that might be relevant is the European Code of Good Conduct on microfinance services. Okay.
Rafael, don't get us started. This is pressing the wrong button.
Oh.
Sorry, I have to interrupt.
Okay. Okay.
I will share with you afterward, but this is the wrong button. We're not going there today.
Yeah. No, the EIF is just their compliance department is just checking that there's not a comma sign in the wrong position in the agreement, but we're ready to sign.
Congratulations. That's really amazing. Cool. Yeah, so happy
and
that
thank
was
you for the
helpful.
support. It wouldn't have been possible without you.
Oh, well,
honestly.
thank you. Well, thank you. I'm just, you know, we're holding the foot while you climb up the ladder. So
Exactly. Yeah.
now let me know if you have any other questions come up afterwards. Right, let me know. I'll share the slides with you. I'll share the slides with Jörg. Thank you, Jörg, that we could do the session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a lovely weekend. We'll be in touch.
And
And we'll be in touch. See you soon.